When Clara Jensen placed her last $15,000 into a crumbling airfield on the edge of nowhere, everyone called her insane. But inside, buried beneath dust, rust, and silence, she uncovered something that would rewrite history and her life. Hangar 7. Before we dive in, take a second to tell me where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe because tomorrow's story will blow your mind. Now, let's step into the windswept tarmac of destiny. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Clara didn't move. Her hands cupped the chipped mug like it still had something to give, like warmth could come back if she waited long enough. The soft hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, that tired, uneven sound that reminded her of how everything in the apartment was one push away from breaking. Her laptop screen glowed in the dim kitchen light, reflecting off the unpaid bills stacked neatly beside it. Numbers. Always numbers. The cruel kind that didn't care about effort or exhaustion. Her eyes drifted to the online banking tab. 15,000 and change. That was it. The final breath of a savings account she'd built and rebuilt 100 times since her husband left. Every time she thought she'd found balance, life shook the table again. She'd been an aviation engineer once, back when equations meant flight, not rent. Back when she used to design things that rose instead of just trying to stay above ground. Now she worked the night shift at Mel's Diner off Route 83, where grease and burnt coffee had become her perfume. A message pinged, foreclosure listings, new properties added, near you. She almost ignored it. Almost. But then she saw the thumbnail. A stretch of tarmac swallowed by sand, a lone control tower silhouetted against a bruised red sky. Abandoned Prescott Regional Airfield, current bid, $15,000. She blinked, certain it was a typo. Airports didn't cost less than sedans. She clicked out of curiosity first, then again out of something deeper. Recognition, maybe, or longing. The description was brief, sterile. Former regional airport. Last active, 1982. Includes 6 hangars, partial office facility, outdated fuel lines, and 1 condemned structure. There were no photos of the condemned hangar, just a single line beneath it. Hangar 7, access restricted. Clara leaned back in her chair. Access restricted, she murmured, tasting the words, like a dare. Her daughter Lily patted in, rubbing her eyes, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. "You're still up," she mumbled. "Yeah, just looking at something," Clara said softly. "Are we moving again?" the girl asked, too used to instability for someone her age. "Not this time," Clara lied, because truth would have sounded like another storm she couldn't afford. Lily nodded sleepily, pressing her cheek to her mother's arm. "You smell like pancakes," she murmured, before wandering back to bed. Clara stared at the screen again. The logical part of her, the engineer, listed the reasons not to do it. Remote area, maintenance nightmare, 0 resale value. But another part, the one that still believed the sky owed her something, whispered louder. She remembered the way her father used to take her to air shows when she was little, how he'd grip her hand as fighter jets tore through the blue like they were rewriting gravity itself. "The sky remembers, Clara," he used to say, "even when people forget." Her phone buzzed. A message from her friend Lisa. "Still awake? Stop doom scrolling, or I'm hiding your Wi-Fi again." Clara smiled faintly, typed back, "Found an airport for sale. Maybe I'll buy it." The typing bubbles appeared. Then, "You're insane. Go to bed." But she didn't. She opened the bidding page, hovering over the blue button. The timer blinked. Auction ends in 12 minutes. Her pulse matched its rhythm. For once, she didn't overthink it. She didn't ask for permission from fear. 15,000, she whispered, her voice trembling like the air before takeoff. Then she clicked. The screen froze for half a second, then flashed, "Congratulations, you are the highest bidder." She laughed, a strange, startled sound that cracked something open inside her. She didn't know what she'd just done. All she knew was that for the first time in years, she felt motion. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains like a slow confession. Clara sat with a cup of fresh coffee, staring at the official email. Transfer of ownership confirmed. Prescott Regional Airfield, Parcel 178AZ, registered to Clara Jensen. Beneath it, an attached PDF, property map, 6 hangars, a note in small print, Hangar 7, condemned, entry not advised. She exhaled. Outside, the desert wind began to rise, rattling the window panes like distant engines, waking after too long a sleep. Somewhere beyond the horizon, an old airfield waited for her, holding its breath under 40 years of dust. Clara smiled faintly, the kind of smile you wear when you have no idea what's coming next. "Guess it's time to fly again," she whispered. And without knowing it, she'd just bought the key to a secret worth more than gold. A secret that had been waiting patiently for someone brave enough or desperate enough to find it. The road turned from gravel to cracked asphalt long before Clara realized they'd crossed the invisible line into her new property. The GPS had given up 6 miles ago, its polite robotic voice replaced by static, and the only thing left to guide her was the wide, skeletal silhouette of the control tower against the horizon. The air shimmered in the heat, bending the world at its edges like glass, melting in slow motion. Max was the first to break the silence from the back seat. "This is it?" His tone balanced between awe and disappointment. "This," Clara said, forcing a smile, "is ours." Lily, smaller, quieter, pressed her palms to the dusty car window. "It looks sad," she murmured. Clara followed her gaze. The airfield sprawled before them like the bones of a forgotten city. 6 hangars lined up like weary soldiers. The control tower leaning slightly and a faded sign hanging from one rusted post. Prescott Regional Airport. Most of the letters were gone, but the ghosts of their outlines remained. A tumbleweed rolled lazily across the cracked runway as if to welcome them. She parked near what used to be the main office, gravel crunching beneath the tires. The air smelled like rust and history, the kind of scent you couldn't wash out of your clothes. The kids stepped out first, their sneakers sinking into soft dust. Wind hissed through broken glass, whispering secrets from a time when this place had mattered. Inside the office, everything was exactly as it had been the day the world forgot it. Old aviation charts curled at the edges on corkboards. Filing cabinets leaned open like yawning mouths. A wall clock was frozen at 3:17. The calendar beside it read June 14, 1982. A faded mug still sat on the counter, the ring of old coffee inside hardened into a fossil. Clara touched the calendar lightly, her fingertips brushing the brittle paper. "Mom?" Max called from the doorway. "There's a bird in here, dead." Clara turned. A small sparrow lay beneath one of the desks, wings folded neatly, as if it had landed just to rest. She crouched beside it, her voice soft. "Guess it flew in and couldn't find its way back out." Max frowned. "That's kind of sad." "Yeah," she whispered. "It is." Lily tugged at her sleeve. "Can we go home now?" Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to say yes, to admit this was a mistake, but something in the air felt charged, like the place itself was waiting, not for someone to leave, but for someone to finally come back. She smiled instead, the kind of smile parents learn to fake for their children's sake. "Let's look around a little first." They walked the runway together, their shadows stretching long and thin across the cracked concrete. A jackrabbit darted between the hangars. The sun beat down, merciless and golden. It felt like standing inside a memory no one had dusted off in decades. When they reached the row of hangars, Max ran his hand along the dented metal siding. "These things are huge," he said. Clara nodded. "They used to house aircrafts. Cargo, private jets, maybe a few military models. Hard to tell now." She trailed her fingers along a faded number painted on one door, 4, then glanced toward the farthest building. That's when Lily stopped walking. Her voice was a whisper. "Mom." Clara turned. The little girl was staring straight ahead at the last hangar on the row. Hangar 7. Its doors were taller, wider, and more weathered than the others, like something ancient disguised as metal. The afternoon sun hit it at an angle, throwing the whole structure in shadow except for one small glint, like a reflection. "Mom," Lily said again, her voice smaller this time, "someone's in there." Clara followed her daughter's line of sight. The rational part of her brain said it was a trick of the light, a piece of glass catching the sun. She wanted to believe that. "Just shadows, honey," she said gently. But even as the words left her mouth, the reflection blinked, once, twice, like a pulse. She froze. The wind picked up suddenly, slamming the loose sheet metal against the hangar's frame with a hollow clang. Max laughed nervously. "That scared me," he said. But Clara didn't answer. Her heart was beating too fast. The flicker had vanished now, but the silence it left behind felt unnatural. Thick, heavy, the kind that pressed against your ribs. She reached for Lily's hand. "Come on," she said quietly. "Let's head back to the car." As they turned, the sound of the desert filled the air again, low, restless, like breathing. Clara glanced back one last time. The glint was gone. Hangar 7 stood still, patient and unbothered. But deep inside her chest, something small and certain whispered that it was watching her leave. The first time Clara saw him, she thought he was a mirage, heat shimmer, shaped like a man. The afternoon sun had begun to fall, painting the airfield in slow-moving gold, and she was walking back toward the car when movement near Hangar 7 caught her eye. At first it was just a shadow breaking the light, tall and unsteady. Then it shifted again, and the shape stepped forward. He was old, frail, with a gray beard that caught the light like wire, and eyes that seemed to see too much and not enough all at once. His bomber jacket looked like it had been borrowed from another century, the leather cracked and sun-bleached, the name patch worn smooth. His boots were laced wrong, one eyelet missing on each. He didn't walk so much as drift, like he was half in this world and half in another. Clara's first instinct was to pull Max and Lily behind her. "Sir," she called cautiously, her voice thin in the desert air, "this is private property." He stopped about 10 feet away, breathing hard, but smiling faintly, as if her words had amused him. "Everything's private until it's forgotten," he said. His voice was gravel and wind, rough, but not unkind. She frowned. "Do you live out here?" He chuckled once, a low sound that cracked like kindling. "Live? Number, stayed maybe. There's a difference." He looked past her toward the line of hangars, his gaze resting where the last one stood in shadow. "You're not the first to come poking around, but you might be the last." Max tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mom, who is he?" The man heard the question and turned his eyes to the boy. "Name's Samuel Pike. Used to keep this place breathing when the rest of the world forgot how." "Maintenance?" Clara asked, relaxing slightly. "Something like that." His eyes flicked to Hangar 7 again, and the temperature seemed to drop a degree. He didn't speak for a long time, and the silence stretched until it started to feel like part of the landscape, ancient, patient, endless. Finally, Clara said, "I bought the property, just trying to see what's worth salvaging." Samuel's smile faded. "Worth?" he repeated softly, almost tasting the word. "People always come here looking for worth. Gold, relics, ghosts. They never ask what it costs to keep it." She folded her arms, uneasy now. "And what exactly is it?" He tilted his head as though considering whether she was ready for the answer. Then he said quietly, "What they couldn't move." A chill crawled up her spine. "What does that mean?" Samuel's gaze went distant. The wind hissed across the runway like a whisper too low to catch. "You'll see soon enough," he murmured. "Just don't go near that hangar till you're ready to remember what the world forgot." She almost laughed, trying to break the tension. "You make it sound like a horror movie." But he didn't smile. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and heavy. When he pressed it into her palm, she looked down to find a brass key, dulled by age, the number 7 etched into its head. Her throat tightened. "What is this?" "The only door left that still opens both ways." His expression softened then, almost tender. "You're the new owner, Miss Jensen. Guess that makes it your burden now." Before she could reply, he turned and started walking toward the far side of the airfield. His shadow stretched long across the tarmac, swallowed by the dying light. Clara called after him once, twice, but he didn't look back. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the soft creak of hangar doors shifting in the wind. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed, if it was a dream, of engines roaring in the dark, wings cutting through stormlight, and a sky burning with colors no human eye had ever named. Somewhere in the distance, beneath all that thunder, a voice whispered her name. When she woke, her fist was clenched around the brass key. It was warm. The desert had a way of erasing things, paint, memory, even time, but not Hangar 7. The building looked like it had been cut out of another world and left here by accident. Every other structure on the property sagged under years of heat and decay, but this one stood rigid and defiant, the metal a darker shade, the seams tighter, the bolts clean. It didn't belong to the same era as the rest of the airport, and Clara felt it before she even touched the doors. The air was cooler near it, as if it generated its own weather. She brushed a layer of dust off the massive padlock, expecting it to crumble like everything else, but what she found made her freeze. It wasn't rusted steel or corroded brass. It was sleek, matte, and cold to the touch. A black padlock with a small square sensor at its center that flickered faintly blue when her hand passed over it. Biometric. She stepped back, blinking. No way. This lock was newer than her car, newer than the laptop sitting on her kitchen table back home. She pressed her fingers to it again, and the faint hum deepened, like the thing was thinking. Then it blinked red and went dead. She stared at the silent hangar, her reflection warping on the metal door. "That's not possible," she whispered. The listing had called it condemned, a forgotten relic from 1982. But this was military-grade technology, the kind she'd only ever seen during her years in engineering before life fell apart. Her mind began to spiral, connecting pieces that didn't fit. Someone had been here after the airport closed. Someone had upgraded this lock, installed power somewhere underground, maybe even kept the systems alive long after the place had been abandoned. The question wasn't how. It was why. "Mom," Max's voice echoed from across the tarmac, breaking her trance. He and Lily stood by the car, their hair blowing wildly in the rising wind. "It's getting dark." "Yeah," she called back, forcing calm into her voice. "I'll be right there." But she didn't move. She crouched near the lock, examining the base of the hangar door. Wires, faintly visible under the dust, disappeared into the ground. Power lines. She followed their trail with her eyes until she saw where they led, the generator building near the tower. A slanted structure half buried in sand and shadow. She hesitated only a moment before walking toward it. The door was jammed, but years of diner work had given her stubborn muscles, and it gave way with a sharp crack. The smell hit her immediately: old oil, burnt copper, and the metallic tang of ozone. The generator sat in the center of the room like a dormant beast, the panels coated in grime but intact. She ran her hand along the edge, and when she reached the back, she froze again. Someone had rewired it, not sloppily, not like a scavenger trying to make it run again, but with precision. Fresh copper lines twisted into the old circuits, feeding into thick conduit that vanished beneath the concrete floor. There was no power company account for this property. She'd checked. Yet when she flipped open the breaker panel, half the lights still glowed faintly green. The circuits were live. Whoever had been maintaining this hadn't been gone long. Clara's pulse quickened. Her rational mind told her to stop, to turn around, take the kids and leave this place to its ghosts. But another part, The part that had once believed in discovery more than safety took over. She connected the backup generator to the main grid, her hands moving automatically, memory waking up in her fingertips. When she pulled the ignition cord, the engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared awake. Sparks flew from the cables and the lights overhead flickered violently before settling into a low, steady glow. The sound spread across the airfield, humming transformers, snapping wires, a low vibration that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. She stepped outside. The runway lights, long dead for 40 years, blinked on one by one, stretching into the horizon like a trail of stars. The desert around her glowed faintly, and for a moment it felt like standing in a dream. Then she heard it. A low mechanical whir from behind her, deep and rhythmic. The sound of gears that hadn't turned in decades, awakening all at once. She spun toward Hangar 7. The lock's blue light had returned, stronger now, pulsing steadily like a heartbeat. And beneath the door, a thin line of light leaked onto the ground, soft but unmistakable. She took one step closer before stopping herself. The hum deepened again, rising into a pitch that vibrated in her chest. The desert wind stilled. Even the crickets had gone silent. "Mom?" Lily's voice carried faintly from the car. Clara didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the glowing seam beneath the hangar door. She knew, without reason or evidence, that whatever was inside wasn't sleeping anymore. Something or someone was waiting. For 2 days the desert became her workshop. The wind howled across the cracked tarmac, carrying sand like whispers from another time. Clara's hands were blistered from the bolt cutters, her arms sore from the stubborn resistance of the rusted chains that wrapped around Hangar 7's doors like restraints. Each metallic snap echoed through the airfield, sharp and final, like cutting through history itself. Max had begged her to stop. Lily had asked if they could go home, but Clara couldn't, not yet. Something deeper than logic had her anchored to that hangar. The hum from the lock hadn't stopped since the night she powered up the generator. It pulsed softly, steady as a heartbeat, as if whatever was sealed inside was alive and waiting for release. On the morning of the 3rd day, the last chain gave way. The heavy doors groaned open, with a sound like thunder rolling underwater. A gust of air rushed out, shockingly cold and metallic, sending dust spiraling through the sunlight. It didn't smell like decay or rust. It smelled filtered, artificial, like air meant for breathing somewhere that wasn't Earth. Lily stood behind her, small hand gripping her mother's sleeve. "Why's it cold?" she whispered. Clara didn't answer. She stepped inside, each footstep echoing off the concrete floor. The temperature dropped another few degrees, enough for her breath to ghost in the air. Her eyes adjusted slowly. In the middle of the vast room sat a massive shape hidden under a gray tarp, its outline too smooth, too deliberate to be debris. The floor beneath it was marked with faded white paint, landing alignment lines, technical codes, a circular emblem she almost didn't recognize until the light hit it just right. NASA. Her chest tightened. She looked up. On the wall, half concealed by dust, was another symbol, one she hadn't seen in decades. The old NASA insignia, the worm-style lettering used before 1984. Below it, stenciled in fading black, Project Arcturus, Flight Beyond. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The words struck a chord buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. Arcturus, the name of a star used as a navigational reference in advanced propulsion research. She'd read about it once in classified reports, long before life reduced her to night shifts and overdue rent. Those files had been marked canceled, but engineers had whispered otherwise. Clara approached the tarp. Her pulse matched the steady hum still vibrating faintly through the hangar floor. With shaking fingers, she lifted a corner. The fabric was thick, waxed, strangely clean, as if someone had been maintaining it even after all these years. The first glimpse stopped her breath cold. Beneath the tarp, the light caught the edge of a body, sleek, black, seamless. Not matte, not glossy, something in between, like obsidian, that absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. The shape curved gracefully from nose to tail, aerodynamic beyond anything she'd ever seen. "This isn't possible," she murmured. She pulled the tarp farther. The full form revealed itself. A prototype aircraft, maybe 30 feet long, wings curved upward like a bird in mid-prayer, the kind of design that shouldn't exist in this timeline. There were no rivets, no seams, no visible propulsion ports. The fuselage seemed grown, not built. She ran her fingertips along the metal and felt warmth where there should have been cold. Max stepped closer, eyes wide. "It's like a spaceship," he said. Clara crouched near the cockpit. The canopy was intact, its glass perfectly clear. Inside, the control system was nothing short of alien. No yoke, no throttle, just a central console with holographic interfaces, dormant now, but faintly glowing at their edges. Embedded within the seat was a small cylindrical core surrounded by fractal wiring. She leaned closer, recognizing some of the configuration, though it was years, decades, ahead of anything she'd studied. A fusion of biology and machinery. Power not drawn, but generated. "This isn't military," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "It's impossible." She sat back on her heels, heart racing. A soft hum rose again, as if the aircraft was aware of being uncovered. The lights from the generator outside flickered once, twice. Lily clung to Max's arm, frightened but curious. "Mom, who built it?" Clara didn't answer. She stared at the insignia again, tracing the faded letters of Project Arcturus. Someone had hidden this here, buried it under decades of dust and secrecy. Not to destroy it, but to protect it. She looked up at the hangar's ceiling. The steel beams above were lined with conduits and vents that didn't match the architecture of the rest of the airport. Maintenance panels glowed faintly blue now, reawakened by the restored power. The entire hangar was a containment unit, engineered to preserve, not abandon. "Someone hid the future here," Clara said softly, her voice trembling with awe and fear, "and they left it behind." As the words left her mouth, the aircraft's console flickered to life. A faint, rhythmic pulse of light illuminated the cockpit. Steady, deliberate, like a heartbeat returning after decades of silence. Clara took a step back, unable to look away. Outside, the wind had stopped. Inside, time had just started again. Samuel Pike didn't come looking for her. He was just there one morning, sitting on the hood of her car when she stepped out of the hangar, the desert sun behind him like a halo of dust and heat. He looked smaller than she remembered, shrunken somehow, as though the air itself had been draining him since she'd last seen him. His bomber jacket hung loose on his frame, the sleeves flapping slightly in the wind. He didn't move when she approached, didn't even glance at the hangar behind her, though she could tell from the tightness in his jaw that he knew exactly what she had done. "You opened it," he said, not as a question, but as a certainty. Clara hesitated. It wasn't locked anymore. He laughed softly, dry as sand scraping metal. "Everything's locked until the right hands touch it." His eyes drifted toward the hangar doors, which still stood slightly ajar. "You shouldn't have done that." She crossed her arms, though the motion did little to steady her. "You said it was my burden now. I just want to know what it is I'm carrying." Samuel slid off the hood and landed heavily on his boots, the sound muffled by the sand. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a silver flask, and took a long, slow sip before speaking again. "It's not a secret anymore, not really. Just a story nobody's brave, or foolish, enough to tell." "Then tell it," she said. He studied her for a long moment, the lines in his face deepening like cracks in old stone. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped low, carried by the desert wind like a confession. "We built it," he said. "The Arcturus. We thought we were gods back then, thought we could cheat the sky itself." Clara felt her heart pound at the name. Arcturus, the word painted on the walls of Hangar 7, the project she'd unearthed like an archaeologist finding a buried civilization. "You were part of it?" she asked. Samuel nodded slowly. "Mechanic, lowest rung in a ladder that reached all the way up to people whose names don't appear in any history book. They told us it was just theory. They said we were building an aircraft that could move faster than radar could track, powered by magnetic displacement. Sounded like fantasy, but the funding never stopped. And then, one day, we finished it." He looked at his hands as if expecting grease stains that had long since faded. "We flew it once, just once. Captain Amelia Jensen at the helm, best pilot I ever met. Brave, brilliant, reckless. She took it up at dawn. We watched from the tower." He paused, eyes unfocused, voice trembling slightly. "She climbed past 60,000 feet, then 80. Then she stopped responding. The radar went blind. No crash, no signal, just gone, vanished midair." Clara's mouth went dry. "And then," he swallowed hard, "6 minutes later, it reappeared over the base. Not falling, hovering, like the laws of gravity had forgotten it. When they brought it down, the surface was changed. The metal felt alive, almost, warm, vibrating. And Amelia," his voice faltered, "she wasn't the same. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't speak. They took her away the next morning. We never saw her again." Clara's chest tightened. Her grandmother's name, Amelia Jensen, echoed in her head like a bell. But she said nothing. She wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. Samuel continued. "After that, they shut everything down. Files burned, hangars sealed, the whole program erased overnight. They said it was a malfunction, pilot error, but the rest of us knew better. Something had come back with it, something they couldn't control." "Then how did it end up here?" Clara asked quietly. He looked up, the corner of his mouth twitching into something between pride and regret. "One bird came home. We hit it before they could destroy it, buried the records, wiped the coordinates, sealed the hangar, and I stayed." "Why?" she whispered. "Because someone had to remember what we'd done." He turned to face her fully now, and for the first time she saw the weight behind his eyes. Not madness, but memory. "And because I was waiting." "For who?" A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "For someone who still believes machines can remember." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "You think I do?" "I know you do," he said. "Otherwise you wouldn't have come here. You wouldn't have touched it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Whatever you found in there, it's not finished with us. The sky never forgets what's been taken from it." The wind shifted then, carrying the faint metallic hum from Hangar 7. Samuel's eyes flicked toward it, and for just a moment Clara thought she saw fear, not of what he'd done, but of what might come next. He tightened his jacket, turned away, and started down the cracked runway. "Be careful, Clara," he called over his shoulder. "Some ghosts don't live in graves. They live in engines." When he disappeared into the horizon, the silence he left behind felt heavier than the air. Clara stood alone by the hangar, the sun sinking low behind her, and for the first time since finding the Arcturus, she wasn't sure whether she had uncovered history or woken it up. The sun had barely risen when Clara found herself back inside Hangar 7. The air felt different now, denser, almost humming with awareness. Ever since Samuel's confession, she couldn't shake the weight pressing behind her ribs, a sense that every breath she took inside that space carried ghosts with it. The Arcturus sat in the center like something ancient and sacred, the sleek hull catching slivers of early light. She told herself she was there to clean, to catalog, to understand, but truthfully, she just couldn't stay away. She climbed into the cockpit again, the air sharp with ozone and cold metal. Dust floated through the shaft of light, breaking across the windshield, turning each mote into a star. The console waited silently, dormant now, its strange blue circuits pulsing faintly as if dreaming. She brushed away a thin layer of grime from the instrument panel, tracing the symbols etched into its surface. They weren't just technical codes. There were equations and notes scrawled by hand, delicate and looping like a signature. She recognized the handwriting, her grandmother's. Clara's throat tightened. She leaned back, blinking fast. She remembered being a child, sitting on her grandmother's lap while the woman told stories about flying, though she'd always claimed they were just dreams. Sometimes, Amelia would say, you reach a height so pure, the sky starts to talk back. Clara had thought it was poetry then. Now it sounded like warning. As she wiped the control column, her cloth snagged on something wedged beneath the co-pilot's seat. A small metallic cylinder, perfectly smooth, no bigger than a thermos. She tugged it free and turned it over in her hands. Along the side, engraved in near-invisible text, were the words, Flight 7, Classified. Her pulse jumped. It wasn't a flight log. It wasn't anything she'd ever seen. The material was black and almost soft to the touch, like it absorbed heat instead of holding it. And faintly, barely visible in the shadows, it glowed. A pulse, slow, steady, alive. Clara swallowed hard. Every part of her training screamed not to touch it. Every part of her curiosity ignored that warning. She carried the cylinder to a nearby workbench, the light catching the dust motes like tiny flares in orbit. The object vibrated gently in her palm, responding to her warmth. She pressed a small indentation on its side. The pulse quickened. Then, with a soft click, the top rotated open and released a thin beam of white light that spread into the air before her. The hangar dimmed. A holographic projection flickered into existence, grainy, spectral, like memory captured on film. A cockpit filled the image, identical to the one she was standing in now. And in the pilot's seat, a woman. Helmet on, breathing steady, her voice clear and calm, filled the empty space. "This isn't air," the woman said, her tone steady but strained. "This is, somewhere else." Static broke the sentence apart, a wash of distortion that made the hair rise on Clara's arms. The woman's breathing grew faster. "Control, do you read? I think I—" Another burst of static. Then softer, near a whisper, "Tell my daughter." The image froze. Then the light blinked out, plunging the hangar back into silence. Clara's body wouldn't move. Her fingers dug into the workbench, knuckles white. The sound of that voice, it wasn't just familiar, it was hers. She barely heard the shuffling footsteps behind her until Samuel's voice broke through the silence. "You shouldn't have powered it," he said quietly. Clara turned slowly, the cylinder trembling in her hands. "Who was she?" Her voice cracked on the question. Samuel's face was pale, the lines around his eyes deeper than ever. He looked past her toward the Arcturus, and for a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally did, the words came out as a sigh. Her name was Amelia Jensen. The world tilted. The sound of the name didn't land like information. It hit like a memory. She saw flashes of her grandmother's hands guiding hers across a piano, the smell of cedar and machine oil from the old garage, the way Amelia would stare at the stars too long, as if trying to recognize an old friend. "That's my grandmother," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "That's her." She flew it. Samuel nodded slowly, and she brought it back. Clara sank to the floor. The cylinder clutched tight against her chest. The hum of the Arcturus filled the hangar again, a low rhythmic vibration that sounded eerily like breathing. The truth unraveled in her mind. She hadn't uncovered a forgotten experiment. She'd uncovered a message left across time by blood and memory. The hangar wasn't just holding a machine. It was holding her family's unfinished story. The office smelled like paper that had forgotten what sunlight was. Dust drifted in the air like lazy snow, landing softly on old binders, file boxes, and broken typewriters. Clara moved through it quietly, her flashlight beam sweeping across decades of stillness. She'd been avoiding this part of the airfield, the old administration building, because something about it felt heavier than the rest, as if the walls themselves knew what had been hidden here. But after what she'd seen inside the hangar, after hearing her grandmother's voice on that flight recording, she needed answers. The office had belonged to someone high-ranking. The brass nameplate on the desk was worn smooth, the letters long gone. Folders were stacked neatly on one side, as if the occupant had expected to return. Most of the drawers were empty, their contents long since boxed up or burned, except for one in the bottom corner, locked. The keyhole was narrow, old-fashioned. She tugged at it once, twice, then sighed. Her patience was thin these days, and she was past asking permission from history. She found a small screwdriver in a desk tray and pried until the lock gave with a soft, metallic snap. Inside was a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The ribbon disintegrated when she touched it, and the letters spilled across the desk like a sudden wind of memory. She froze. The handwriting, delicate, looping, familiar. It was the same script that covered the old recipe cards her mother had kept in a tin box under the kitchen sink. The same writing that had signed her birthday cards when she was small, her grandmother's. Clara picked one up carefully, unfolding the yellowed paper. The ink had faded, but not vanished. It was dated 1981, 2 years before Amelia Jensen's flight disappeared. At the top it read, "To my daughter, should you ever want to know who I was before you were born." Clara's throat tightened as she read. "I've been working on something extraordinary," the letter began. "A project called Arcturus. They tell us it's for exploration, that will push humanity's reach beyond what we can imagine. But I can't shake the feeling that what we're touching isn't just science, it's something older, something that doesn't want to be touched." The words blurred as tears welled in Clara's eyes. She blinked them away and reached for the next page. "I've seen the prototype fly," Amelia wrote. "It's not like watching a machine. It's like watching instinct itself take form. The craft bends light when it moves. You don't hear it, you feel it. We're told to trust the math, but the air around it hums like it's alive. Sometimes, when the hangar is quiet, I swear it hums back." Clara set the letter down, her fingers trembling. The flashlight's beam quivered with her. She pulled another page free, smaller, written in haste. The words were slanted, rushed, panicked. "They say we're building a weapon," the letter said, "but they're wrong. Arcturus isn't meant to destroy. It's meant to connect. If you read this, know that the sky isn't what you think it is. We've been calling it a boundary, but it's a door, and doors can open both ways." A chill ran through her as the implications settled in. Arcturus wasn't designed for warfare. It was a bridge, something built to traverse not just distance, but dimensions. A portal between what humanity knew and what it feared to understand. Her grandmother hadn't died in an accident. She'd crossed something. Clara leaned against the desk, pressing a hand to her chest as her breath came unevenly. It all made sense now. The secrecy, the erasure, the silence that followed. They hadn't just shut down the project because it failed. They'd buried it. They'd buried her. She gathered the letters, reading the last one through trembling fingers. "If I don't come back," Amelia wrote, "remember this. What we discover will scare them because it shows how small we really are. But fear doesn't erase truth. It only hides it until someone brave enough comes looking." The edges of the page fluttered in the draft from a cracked window, as if the air itself was breathing with her. Clara stared down at her grandmother's final line for a long time before whispering, barely audible, they erased her to protect themselves. Outside, the desert wind howled low and mournful, rattling the glass in its frame. Inside, under the hum of the power she'd reawakened, the letters lay across the desk like fragile proof that history hadn't been lost, only waiting for someone to remember. It started with the sound of gravel under tires. Clara looked up from the hangar floor where she'd been sorting through toolboxes and blueprints and saw a cloud of dust rising along the dirt road. A beat-up SUV came into view, the kind used by people who wanted to look unassuming but carried more than curiosity. She wiped the sweat from her forehead. Already bracing for another trespasser or thrill-seeker, hoping for a selfie in front of Arizona's ghost airport. But when the man stepped out, she realized he didn't look like either. He had a camera bag slung over his shoulder, a notepad tucked under one arm, and a kind of restless alertness in his eyes. He introduced himself with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Theo Miles, Prescott Herald, though I do freelance pieces for the Phoenix Tribune. Hope I'm not intruding. Heard someone bought the old airfield. Word travels fast, she said, trying to sound casual. News likes strange things, he replied. And this place has a reputation for it. He glanced past her shoulder toward Hangar 7, where the heavy doors were still sealed shut except for the narrow gap she'd left open. Locals say the lights out here came back on last week. Thought it was a power glitch until someone spotted runway beacons glowing from 10 miles away. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Clara hesitated. There was no use denying it. I restored the generator, she said. Needed power to inspect the structures. He scribbled something in his notebook. Funny thing, he said, glancing up. No one's paid for electricity here since 1983. She folded her arms. You did your research. I do that, he said lightly. Actually, I've been researching this site for a while. Rumors say it was part of a Cold War aerospace program. People vanished. Records scrubbed. Sound familiar? The way he said it made something cold flicker through her chest. He wasn't here for a story about renovation. He was chasing ghosts. Theo noticed her silence and softened his tone. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want the truth. Half the military's black projects from that era disappeared off the books, but this one, Arcturus, it's different. It's like someone tried to erase it from existence. Clara blinked. You know the name? He smiled faintly. So it's true. Later, when she led him into the hangar, she almost turned him away at the threshold. Something in her resisted the idea of anyone else seeing the Arcturus. But another part, the part that had spent years being unseen, unheard, wanted someone to witness it, someone who would understand. The moment the tarp came off, Theo went still. His camera dangled uselessly at his side. Jesus, he whispered, this isn't just history. He walked around the aircraft slowly, reverently, like he was in a cathedral. This is technology no one should have had then. Maybe not even now. Clara watched him, trying to read his reaction. You believe me now? I believed you the moment you said, Arcturus, he said. But this... He knelt near the cockpit, staring at the faint lines of light that pulsed under the hull. This changes everything. He straightened up, eyes sharp now with purpose. You can't keep this hidden. People need to see it. We could bring in a university team, maybe Smithsonian, hell, even NASA. If we publish your story with the evidence here, you'll make history. Amelia Jensen won't just be a forgotten name in a footnote. Clara's heart clenched at her grandmother's name. The idea of bringing her back into the light, of giving her the recognition she deserved, burned bright inside her. For years, she had existed quietly, in the background of her own life. But here, in this moment, someone saw her, not as a waitress or a struggling mother, but as someone standing at the edge of something extraordinary. Samuel's voice broke through her thoughts. He'd appeared silently at the door, the way he always did, his shadow stretching long across the hangar floor. Don't, he said simply. Theo turned, startled. Who's this? The only one who remembers what happens when people get curious, Samuel said. He stepped closer, his gaze locked on Clara. Once the sky hears its name again, it won't stay silent. Clara frowned. You said that before. I meant it before, he replied. What's buried here isn't just metal and code. It's a wound. Some things don't want to be uncovered. Theo scoffed. That's poetic, but fear doesn't keep history alive. Samuel ignored him. His eyes stayed on Clara. Ask yourself if you're ready for the kind of attention this brings, the kind that burns everything it touches. But Clara couldn't unsee the spark in Theo's eyes or the reflection of herself within it. For the first time in years, she felt the pulse of purpose in her veins again. Not survival, not regret, something closer to belonging. She turned toward Samuel, her voice low but steady. "I've lived in silence long enough." And though the old man's expression darkened, she could almost hear the Arcturus hum in quiet agreement, as if even it was waking to the sound of being seen. The first thing Clara noticed was the silence. It wasn't the natural quiet of the desert, the kind that hummed with wind and far-off coyotes, but something denser, deliberate. A pause before a storm. She had been sitting in the control tower office, going over Theo's notes by the dim light of a desk lamp, when she saw the faint glint of headlights cresting the distant ridge. At first, she thought it was just a late traveler passing through the desert night. But then the lights went out, every single one. She stood, heart beginning to thud against her ribs. Outside, the air shimmered under a moonless sky. Black SUVs, at least 4 of them, rolled silently onto the cracked runway. No headlights, no plates, the kind of vehicles that didn't exist on paper. She reached for her phone, but there was no signal. There hadn't been for days, but now even the faint hum of the radio was gone. The frequency was dead. Theo had been sleeping on an old cot near the window. He sat up when he saw her face. "What is it?" "Visitors," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He joined her at the window and froze. The vehicles came to a stop about 50 yards from Hangar 7. Men stepped out in perfect synchronization, all wearing black uniforms, all unmarked. Their boots hit the ground at the same time. No chatter, no orders spoken aloud, just movement, purposeful, efficient, and wrong. Theo grabbed his camera, but Clara put a hand on his arm. "Don't," she hissed. "They'll see the light." But Theo was already recording, crouched behind the window's edge. He zoomed in on the group, capturing one man raising a hand and signaling toward the hangar. Another approached with a large metal case. They were setting up something, equipment, scanners, maybe explosives. Clara's stomach sank. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to take. Lily stirred from her makeshift bed in the corner. "Mom?" she whispered sleepily. Max was already awake, his eyes wide with fear. Clara crouched beside them, pressing a finger to her lips. "Stay quiet," she whispered, "no matter what." A deep metallic clang echoed through the airfield as the men began working on the hangar's doors. Sparks flared briefly in the dark, cutting tools, heavy machinery, things that didn't belong in a place that was supposed to be forgotten. Clara's every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The desert stretched endless around them, and the only shelter was the crumbling tower that now felt more like a trap. Theo moved to the stairs, whispering, "If I can get close enough, maybe I can—" He didn't finish. The door below burst open with a crash, and figures flooded inside. Flashlights cut through the stairwell. Clara grabbed the kids and pulled them behind a filing cabinet as Theo's camera light flickered on instinctively. That tiny flash sealed his fate. "Over there!" a voice barked. Theo ran for the back exit, but 2 men caught him before he made it 10 feet. Clara clamped a hand over Lily's mouth as Theo's muffled shout was drowned by the sound of boots and struggle. They dragged him toward the SUVs, his voice breaking once, "Clara!" before the slam of a door ended it. Then came the sound, a low hum building from deep within the hangar, so low it rattled the glass panes in the tower. The men stopped moving. One turned his head sharply toward the sound, flashlight beam trembling across the hangar doors. The hum deepened. The floodlights they'd brought flickered once, twice, then exploded in a shower of sparks. Darkness swallowed everything. There was a single horrible moment of silence, then a shriek of tearing metal, a sound that didn't belong to machinery or man. It was alive. The ground shook. Clara hugged the children close, every muscle in her body frozen in instinctive terror. When the lights finally returned, the SUVs were still there, but the men were gone. No voices, no movement, no bodies. Just the faint smell of ozone, and something burned. Clara crept to the window. Her breath fogged the glass as she stared at the scene below. The hangar doors stood sealed again, untouched, as if they'd never been tampered with. But scattered across the concrete were footprints, dozens of them, burned into the ground, The impressions were deep, blackened, charred into the surface like the shadow of something that had stood too close to lightning. Samuel appeared an hour later, his face ghostly in the pale dawn light. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He simply looked at the sealed hangar, its faint hum resonating through the quiet morning, and said softly, "It woke up." Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. Because beneath the hum, faint but undeniable, she could swear she heard something else, like a heartbeat, slow and patient, pulsing through the metal walls of Hangar 7. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every time Clara closed her eyes, the images replayed. The black SUVs, the lights exploding, the men vanishing into silence as if the air itself had swallowed them whole. The hum from Hangar 7 hadn't stopped since. It was faint but constant, pulsing through the floorboards of the old dormitory where she'd moved her children after the control tower began to feel too exposed. Max had finally drifted off, arm thrown over his face, while Lily clutched her sketchbook like a lifeline. But Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting each flicker of the generator light as if it were marking time between worlds. At some point, exhaustion claimed her, but it wasn't rest that came, it was flight. She was weightless, suspended in a sea of stars that pulsed in rhythm, not random but deliberate, like Morse code written across the universe. The earth hung far below her, a swirl of blue and gold, fragile and distant. Her heartbeat slowed to match the cadence of the stars. Then, through the infinite quiet, came a voice that was both near and everywhere. "Finish the flight." It was her grandmother's voice, soft, steady, threaded with something achingly familiar. "Amelia?" Clara tried to speak, but her voice didn't sound like her own. The stars flared brighter, and one of them, larger, closer, seemed to move toward her, expanding until it wasn't light at all, but a doorway. Shapes flickered beyond it, shadows of wings and clouds bending in impossible directions. Her pulse quickened. The voice came again, closer this time. "Finish what I started." The light engulfed her, and then she was falling, downward, through color and silence, toward something vast and waiting. She woke with a sharp gasp. Wind howled through the broken windows, rattling them in their frames. The dorm was dark except for the faint blue glow bleeding in from outside. She sat up slowly, disoriented. The generator had shut off hours ago. There should have been no light. But out across the runway, through the thinning fog, Hangar 7 shimmered, its floodlights blazing to life, one by one in perfect sequence, like a heartbeat, returning after flatline. Clara's breath caught. She looked at the sleeping faces of her children, then at the brass key resting on the nightstand beside her bed. Samuel's warning echoed in her mind. Once the sky hears its name again, it won't stay silent. She should have stayed, locked the doors, pretended she hadn't seen it, but something deeper than fear tugged at her, a pull that felt almost biological, like the ocean's pull on the tide. She slipped out of bed quietly, barefoot, the cold floor biting against her skin. The night air stung as she stepped outside. The runway stretched ahead, silvered by moonlight and fog. Each step echoed in the stillness, the air thick with the faint hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She didn't bring a flashlight. She didn't need one. The glow from the hangar grew brighter with every step, almost breathing. When she reached the doors, they were already open. A low mist coiled out from within, curling around her ankles as if trying to decide whether to let her pass. She hesitated at the threshold. The smell hit her first. Not metal or oil, but ozone, sharp and clean, like the air before a storm. The interior lights flickered alive in sequence, illuminating the Arcturus where it sat gleaming like it had never aged a day. The cockpit canopy was open. Her pulse jumped. She climbed the steps to the platform slowly, the hum vibrating through the soles of her feet. The pilot seat waited, empty, except for a single piece of folded paper lying in its center. She reached for it with trembling fingers. The paper was crisp and white, impossibly untouched by dust or time. Across its surface, written in the same looping script she'd seen on the letters, were 4 words for Clara: trust the sky. Her throat tightened. "Grandma?" she whispered into the still air. There was no answer, only the faint rhythmic sound of the Arcturus humming beneath her hand. She looked up through the open canopy. The stars above seemed brighter, closer, almost pulsing in time with the craft itself. The night wind rushed through the hangar, lifting her hair as if the world were inhaling. Clara stood there for a long time, barefoot and shivering, torn between terror and awe. Then she closed her eyes and pressed her palm against the cool metal of the cockpit. The hum deepened. For a moment she could have sworn the aircraft was breathing back. The days bled together after the night of the note. The words, "Trust the sky," followed Clara everywhere. They lived behind her eyelids, whispered in the static of her thoughts. She couldn't stay away from Hangar 7 anymore. It had become gravity itself, pulling her back again and again, until her hands knew the shape of every panel, every tool, every circuit hidden beneath the aircraft's sleek skin. The world outside the fence faded, the bills, the diner job she hadn't called into for weeks, the concerned voicemails she ignored. There was only this, the hum, the metal, the sense that she was finishing a sentence written long before she was born. By day she worked in silence, her fingers blackened with oil and graphite, tracing her grandmother's handwriting on the yellowed notes she'd found. Amelia had drawn schematics with the precision of an engineer, but the heart of a poet. Equations woven with words like resonance, breath, and memory. At first, the blueprints made no sense. Half the energy readings defied physics. The rest used notations Clara didn't recognize. But slowly, line by line, she began to understand. This machine didn't run on combustion or propulsion. It harmonized. It listened. It responded to vibration, frequency tuned to something deeper than sound. Max and Lily spent their afternoon sweeping the hangar floor, wiping dust from the walls, running errands for their mother, without understanding that they were cleaning a tomb or resurrecting what it held. Sometimes Lily would hum while she worked, an aimless tune, and Clara would notice the faint tremor it caused in the metal walls. Once the Arcturus itself seemed to answer with a low, sympathetic vibration, like 2 strings tuned to the same pitch. Lily laughed, thinking it was just an echo. Clara didn't correct her. At night, when the desert fell silent, Clara studied the heart of the machine. The cylindrical core she now knew was the engine, though the word felt too small. It pulsed faintly, light moving inside it like liquid silver. The more she studied, the more she realized this wasn't just an engine. It was a living system, one that needed equilibrium, not ignition. The power had never truly died. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for a voice it recognized. She spent 3 weeks tracing the old power conduits, repairing broken nodes, feeding new wires into circuits that had been dormant for 40 years. The generator's hum became her companion. Each flicker of light across the cockpit was a pulse in her chest. The kids slept in the small office beside the hangar now, their beds surrounded by boxes of parts and half-finished tools. Some nights Max asked her what she was doing. "Fixing what they tried to forget," she'd answer softly, brushing a smudge of grease from his cheek. When it happened, it didn't feel like an accident. It felt like the end of a countdown she hadn't realized had started. That night, the air was heavy with storm clouds, the kind that built on the horizon but never quite broke. Clara stood in front of the Arcturus, the brass key from Samuel in her hand, turning it over and over like a worry stone. The cockpit lights shimmered faintly, almost expectant. "Mom," Max said behind her, "it's late. You've been out here all day." "I know," she murmured, eyes fixed on the core. "Just one last thing." She climbed into the cockpit, heart pounding. Her grandmother's notes had mentioned a sequence, 3 switches, a pause, then a 4th held for 7 seconds. She followed it exactly. For a moment nothing happened. Then the floor began to tremble. The sound that rose wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the whine of turbines or the grind of gears. It was harmonic, low, pure, and impossibly beautiful. It wrapped around them, filled the space, sank into the bones of the hangar itself. The walls vibrated like the inside of a cathedral. Lily clapped her hands over her ears, but she was smiling. "Mom," Max whispered, awe in his voice, "it's singing." Light spilled from the engine core, cascading over the metal in waves. Clara could feel it thrumming through her hands where they gripped the console. The dials came alive, readings flickering in unfamiliar symbols. She didn't understand half of it, but she knew what it meant. The Arcturus wasn't remembering, it was waking up. A shadow moved in the doorway. Samuel stood there, framed by lightning flickering in the clouds behind him. His face looked older, carved by something beyond time. He didn't shout to be heard over the sound. He didn't need to. His voice carried perfectly, like the air itself was listening. "Once it flies again," he said, "the past will find you." Clara looked at her children, Max's wide eyes, Lily's trembling hands, their reflections caught in the glow. She reached for the final lever, her fingers steady now. "Then let it come," she said. The harmonic note deepened, richer, fuller, until it no longer sounded like sound at all, but like the heartbeat of the sky itself returning after a long, silent sleep. The dawn came quietly, pale light spilling across the desert like a slow breath. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of rain that never fell. Inside Hangar 7 the hum had deepened overnight, rising and falling like the pulse of a living thing. Clara hadn't slept. She'd spent the hours between midnight and sunrise checking every connection, every seal, every sequence of her grandmother's handwritten notes. There was no logic left in what she was doing, only instinct and something larger whispering through her blood. Max and Lily stood near the door, bleary-eyed but determined. They knew something was coming, even if they couldn't name it. Clara looked at them, memorizing the way the morning light caught the edge of their faces. "You stay here," she said softly. "No matter what happens, you don't come in until it's quiet again." Max swallowed hard. "You're not leaving us, right?" She smiled, though her throat tightened. "I'm finding something," she said. "Something that's been waiting for us." She climbed into the cockpit. The seat molded to her like it had been expecting her shape all along. Her hands settled on the controls, and the humming sound from the engine core rose in greeting. She glanced at the small, folded note she'd tucked into the console the night before. Her grandmother's words, "Trust the sky." Clara pressed her thumb against it and whispered, "I'm trying." The hangar lights flickered once, twice. The energy readings pulsed across the screen in patterns she couldn't decipher, but somehow understood. The Arcturus didn't speak in code or coordinates. It spoke in resonance. She flipped the activation switch. The sound that followed wasn't mechanical. It was choral. The walls vibrated in harmony, dust spiraling up in delicate patterns that shimmered like gold in the dawn light. The wings unfolded with a fluid motion, seamless, organic. It wasn't just flight, it was awakening. Outside, Max and Lily shielded their eyes as the light inside the hangar shifted from white to a brilliant silver blue. "Mom!" Lily called out, but her voice was lost in the rising hum. Clara didn't feel liftoff. She didn't feel thrust or movement. She felt stillness, as though the Arcturus wasn't carrying her anywhere but unbinding her from everything that held her down. The floor beneath her rippled, then dissolved, turning into a curtain of radiant light. And then she was gone. The world above never saw her leave. The hangar, the runway, the sleeping desert, all fell silent again as the curtain of light sealed itself like nothing had ever happened. Inside there was no up or down, no sound or silence. Colors bled into one another, shifting between familiar and foreign, brilliant hues that weren't colors at all but sensations. She floated weightlessly, her reflection fragmenting and reforming, time itself bending like glass. She saw flashes, people, places, moments. A city lit by gas lamps, then one wrapped in neon. A child laughing beneath the first flight of a Wright brothers plane. A woman in a control tower staring at radar blips that vanished into nothing. And then, her grandmother. Amelia stood beside her, as clear as daylight. Her hair was loose, her flight jacket unzipped, her expression calm and radiant. "You came," she said, her voice a whisper that somehow filled every corner of that impossible space. Clara's breath caught. "Grandma," she managed, though her voice trembled, "you built this." Amelia smiled softly. "We built it to remind them that humanity wasn't meant to be small. That the sky isn't the limit. It's the beginning." Clara reached for her, tears rising as the stars shifted behind them, merging into rivers of color. "Why me?" "Because you still listen," Amelia said, "and because it remembers you." Their hands touched. Warmth spread through Clara's body, not heat, but recognition. The Arcturus pulsed brighter, the light folding inward like a heartbeat closing in on itself. For one impossible moment, Clara saw everything. The earth below, blue and endless, her children waiting at the edge of dawn, Samuel standing outside, hat in hand, staring up at the silent hangar. She felt the hum of every atom, every living thing, vibrating in perfect unison, and then everything went white. No explosion, no sound, just light, infinite and clean. When the morning sun rose fully over the desert, Hangar 7 stood quiet again. The doors were closed. The air still shimmered faintly, as if remembering the moment something greater than flight had passed through it. And though no one could explain the resonance that trembled in the ground for hours afterward, those who lived nearby swore they heard something, soft, distant, and unearthly. A single note, fading slowly into the sky. The desert was still when it came back. Not a sound, not even the wind. For hours, the sky above Prescott had been an unbroken canvas of blue-gray, the horizon trembling with the heat of early afternoon. Then, without a flash, without thunder or fire, the air shimmered once, and there it was, the Arcturus. It sat in the center of the runway, silent, unmarked, its black hull gleaming under the bruised sun as if nothing had happened. The air around it was charged, faintly crackling, like static before a storm. No scorch marks, no smoke, not even disturbed dust on the concrete. It hadn't landed. It had simply appeared. Clara woke to the sound of nothing. That was what made her open her eyes. The absence of the hum that had lived inside her bones for weeks. She sat up too fast, head spinning, breath ragged. Her memories came in pieces. The light, her grandmother's face, the feeling of touching something bigger than the sky itself, and then nothing. Max and Lily were huddled nearby, asleep in the shadow of the control tower. They stirred when she rose, blinking against the light. "Mom?" Max asked, voice small. "I'm here," she said, though her voice trembled. "I'm okay." She wasn't sure she was, but it was the only thing she could give him. Then Lily pointed, her eyes wide. "Mom, the plane." Clara turned. The Arcturus stood whole again, as if it had never moved, its smooth surface reflecting the faint shimmer of morning light. Her pulse leapt. She walked toward it slowly, barefoot, her steps careful, reverent. The hangar doors had somehow opened again, wide enough to let it through, though she had never heard them move. The cockpit canopy was still sealed, glinting in the sun. When she climbed the ladder and laid a hand against the glass, it was cold, far colder than metal should be under desert heat. A layer of frost spread briefly under her palm, then vanished. She pressed the release. The canopy opened with a soft hiss, the interior dark and quiet. Inside, everything looked the same. Every control was exactly where she'd left it, except the power indicators, all dead. The system was cold, like a body without a pulse. But in the co-pilot seat there was something new, a small black metal box. It was sleek, perfectly rectangular, and on its surface was an engraving in sharp silver lettering, Project Arcturus, Continuum Drive, 2049 Revision. Clara stared at the date, 2049, 25 years in the future. Her hand hovered above it. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's impossible." But even as she said it, she could feel the faint warmth radiating from the box, as though it had traveled through something alive. She unlatched the top, careful, half afraid of what she might see. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was a single crystal data core, glowing faintly from within, a pulsing blue light that seemed to throb in rhythm with her heartbeat. She didn't need to plug it into anything to know what it was. Her instincts, her engineering mind, her memory, all recognized it. Blueprints. But not of the aircraft, of something more, something beyond propulsion, beyond flight. The schematics shifted inside her mind before her eyes could fully comprehend them. Structures of energy, sound, and resonance. Instructions for systems that didn't exist yet. Bridges, not across space, but through it. Her grandmother's voice whispered through the back of her mind, "It's not meant to conquer the sky, Clara. It's meant to listen to it." Her vision blurred. She looked around for Samuel, needing him to tell her what she already feared, that this wasn't a gift. It was an answer to a question humanity hadn't learned how to ask. But Samuel wasn't there. His old cot by the maintenance bay was empty, the blanket folded neatly. The cup of coffee he always left half full sat on the shelf, untouched but cold. On the table beside it was a scrap of paper, folded once. Clara picked it up with trembling fingers. The handwriting was his, small, deliberate, almost graceful. "It listens to who deserves it." She read it again and again until the words blurred into the paper. The hangar was quiet, too quiet. She could feel the faint hum of the data core even from where she stood, soft as breathing. Outside, the sun dipped behind the mountains, turning the sky to molten gold. The desert air vibrated faintly, as if the world was waiting for something, for her to make the next move. She looked down at the black box, its light flickering once like a heartbeat. She knew then that Arcturus hadn't come back empty. It had brought the future with it and chosen her to decide whether the world would ever be ready to hear it. Theo showed up at dawn, barefoot, disoriented, and covered in dust. Clara found him wandering near the airstrip, his shirt torn, his eyes unfocused like he'd been walking in circles for days. When she called his name, he flinched, as if the sound of it hurt. For a long moment he just stared at her like she was both familiar and foreign. Then he whispered, "They took something from me." Clara caught him before he collapsed. His body trembled under her hands. "Theo? What happened? Where did you go?" He shook his head, eyes wide, his voice hoarse from thirst. "I don't know. I was in the SUV, and then nothing. I woke up on the edge of town. My phone's gone. My camera's gone. My notes—" He stopped, staring past her toward Hangar 7. "It's like the last week doesn't exist. I remember meeting you, the airport, but everything after that, blank. Like someone erased me." Clara helped him inside, letting him sip water from a tin mug while she studied his face. He looked hollowed out, like something vital had been taken. But when he glanced up, there was still a spark behind his exhaustion. The reporters need to know. "What did they do, Clara?" She hesitated. How could she explain what had happened? That she'd flown through light, through something beyond sky and time, that the plane had returned with a message from the future and a note from a man who had vanished, that Samuel's warning had come true, and now the world was stirring again, listening for what it had once silenced. She simply said, "You don't want to know." Theo's jaw tightened. "I have to know." "No," she said softly. "You don't." For a long time he said nothing. Then he laughed, a quiet, broken sound. "You're right," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Because even if you told me, they'd just take it from me again." He stayed silent after that, watching the morning light spill through the cracks in the hangar walls. His gaze lingered on the Arcturus, on the way its black surface shimmered faintly like oil on water. He didn't ask about the strange glow from the cockpit or the faint hum vibrating through the concrete floor. Some part of him, she realized, already understood he wasn't meant to. When he finally left, he didn't look back. That night, Clara sat on the hangar floor with her children asleep beside her. The black box sat open in front of her, the data core glowing softly, bathing the room in blue light. She turned it in her hands, feeling its subtle pulse. Inside that faint glow were blueprints, formulas, and theories beyond anything humanity had yet imagined. Energy without combustion, travel without distance, power without destruction. It could change everything, end scarcity, cure wars, reshape existence itself, or destroy it all. Her laptop was already open, the cursor blinking in a new message draft addressed to 3 scientific institutions and 1 anonymous buyer she'd found through Theo's old contacts. All she had to do was attach the files and press send. She could sell the data and make her family safe for life. No more running, no more fear. The world would know the truth. But as she stared at the shimmering glow reflecting in her children's faces, a cold certainty filled her chest. She saw it too clearly, the same men in black SUVs, the same hunger that had buried Arcturus once before. Power disguised as progress. Discovery turned into dominance. That was what her grandmother had feared. That was why she'd hidden it. Clara's hand hovered over the keyboard. Then she closed the laptop. Max stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly, and Lily's small hand found hers without waking. The touch grounded her, gentle and certain. She looked down at them, their faces open, trusting, and realized the decision had already been made. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, quiet, but full of something unshakable. "We keep it safe," she said, "until the world learns how to listen." She stood and crossed the hangar, placing the black box back inside the cockpit of the Arcturus. The faint hum deepened in response, almost as if it understood. The lights overhead flickered once, casting the aircraft in silver before fading again. Outside, the wind swept across the empty runway, carrying with it the faintest sound, like a chord played on strings made of light. The world, it seemed, was still listening. But for now, Clara Jensen would be its silence. The wind began as a whisper, soft, almost tender, winding through the cracks of Hangar 7. By the time Clara realized what it was, the whisper had turned to a howl. The horizon disappeared beneath a wall of rising sand, the color of old rust and blood. The air turned electric. It wasn't a natural storm. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't weather. It was a search. She moved quickly, her body running on instinct sharper than fear. The data core pulsed faintly in her hands, its glow muted under the swirling dust now leaking through the hangar doors. Every vibration of it seemed to sync with her heartbeat, as if it could feel the danger pressing in. The drones arrived first, small, black, soundless. Their lights swept across the desert in perfect formation. Clara watched from the shadows, the edges of her lungs burning with sand, her thoughts cutting through the roar. Someone had found them, someone who knew what the Arcturus had brought back. "Mom, what's happening?" Max shouted over the wind, his voice high with panic. Lily clutched his sleeve, her hair whipping across her face like a ribbon in the storm. Clara pulled them close, crouching low. "Listen to me," she said, forcing her voice steady. "No matter what happens, you stay together. If they take me—" "Take you?" Max's eyes widened. "If they take me," she repeated, "find Samuel's key. It's the only thing that can open what's meant to stay hidden. Do you understand?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "Where are you going?" "Just stay here," Clara said. "I have to hide something." She grabbed her jacket and bolted for the control tower, the sand tearing at her skin like claws. The air was thick, the world dim and red, but she knew this land now. Every corridor, every panel. She reached the maintenance hatch by the runway and wrenched it open. Beneath it, the old tunnels yawned, built during the war and long since abandoned. She lowered the data core carefully into the darkness, whispering, "Stay silent. Stay safe." When she sealed the hatch again, it was as though the storm itself exhaled. But the relief didn't last. A flash of light cut through the swirling haze. The drones were descending now, their engines humming with a frequency that vibrated through her teeth. She stumbled back toward the hangar, the wind pushing against her like a living wall. The doors rattled violently, metal screaming in protest. She slammed them shut just as a gust hit, sending debris and grit cascading through the cracks. The power flickered. Lights died. Inside, the world went still for one breath. Then the doors blew open. The force knocked her backward. The children screamed, covering their faces as sand poured in like a wave. Through the storm's fury, a figure stepped forward, not in armor, not in the faceless black of soldiers, but in a white coat that seemed impossibly untouched by the chaos outside. Her posture was effortless, confident, as if she'd walked through worse storms before. Clara's hand reached instinctively for the nearest tool, a wrench, useless but solid. The woman raised a hand, palm outward, calm. "Don't," she said. Her voice carried easily through the noise, clear and commanding. "I didn't come to take it." Clara's chest heaved. "Who are you?" The woman stepped closer, her face now visible under the flickering light. She was older than Clara expected, mid-50s, composed, eyes sharp as glass. She looked like someone who'd spent her entire life giving orders and having them obeyed. "My name is Malene Ward," she said. "I head Athelian Industries. You might know it by its old name, Ward Corp." The words hit like a strike. Clara's grip on the wrench loosened. "Ward Corp," she repeated, the sound of it thick with disbelief. "The same people who erased Arcturus. You buried it." Malene's gaze didn't waver. "No," she said softly. "I tried to, but you brought it back." Clara's pulse roared in her ears. "If you're here for the data—" "I'm not," Malene interrupted. "I know what's inside that core. It's not power. It's invitation." The storm howled outside, thunder rolling low across the desert. Clara took a step forward. "Invitation to what?" "To what comes next," Malene said. "Your grandmother understood it. So did Samuel. But they tried to stop it because they were afraid. You shouldn't be." Clara felt the hangar tremble beneath her feet. Dust and light mixed in the air, swirling around them like a halo. Malene met her eyes. "Whatever you do next, Clara Jensen, don't mistake silence for safety. The sky is listening again." And before Clara could reply, the wind died as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the faint hum of the Arcturus. Steady, patient, alive. The storm had burned itself out by morning, leaving the air heavy and still. Sand blanketed the runway like snow, soft and soundless underfoot. The hangar stood half open, its doors creaking faintly in the wind's exhausted breath. Inside, the light was strange, muted, golden, as if the storm had changed the color of the world. Clara stood at the edge of the Arcturus, her arms crossed, her mind running laps around the words Malene Ward had left her with. The woman hadn't left that night. She'd stayed, calm and unhurried, as if the storm had been her doing, as if she'd called it just to arrive unseen. Now she sat on a metal crate near the aircraft, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, studying the ship with the careful, reverent eye of someone who understood too much. Clara approached her cautiously. "You never told me what you meant," she said. "Invitation to what?" Malene's eyes lifted from the craft. "You think your grandmother built this to reach the stars," she said, "but she didn't. She built it because something out there was already reaching for us." Clara frowned. "That's impossible." "So was this plane." Malene stood, brushing the dust from her hands. "When Arcturus first flew, it disappeared because it made contact with something. The flight logs, what little survived, recorded an electromagnetic resonance that didn't match any natural frequency on Earth. It wasn't interference, it was language." Clara blinked. "Language?" Malene nodded. Project Arcturus wasn't just flight technology, it was a map. A message written in vibration, coded into frequency and light. Your grandmother realized that before anyone else. She believed whoever or whatever sent it was guiding her, showing her how to build the bridge. Clara felt her pulse quicken. You're saying she made contact? I'm saying she answered one. Maline's gaze softened. She understood what none of us did. That the universe isn't silent, it sings. Every planet, every star, every particle hums its own note. When you line those notes up in perfect harmony, something listens back. Clara turned toward the Arcturus, her reflection bending across its sleek black surface. The hum she'd always felt under her skin seemed louder now, insistent, alive. She didn't build an aircraft, she murmured. She built a bridge. Maline's voice lowered. A bridge to something waiting beyond Earth. Maybe not a place, maybe not even beings the way we think of them, but intelligence, older than us, watching, waiting for someone to respond. Clara's breath hitched. The memory of the flight came rushing back, the colors bleeding together, the sense of presence just beyond perception, the voice that had sounded like her grandmother's, but also like something infinite. I saw her, she whispered. When I flew, I saw her in the light. She wasn't there, Maline said gently. Not as you think. That's how it communicates, with memory, with emotion, with the things we can't quantify. It shows us what we need to see, so we'll understand what we're looking at. Clara looked back at her. Then why hide it? Why erase it all? Because we weren't ready, Maline said. Because if this world can barely survive its own divisions, imagine what happens when it learns there's something greater, something that doesn't just see us, but calls us. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Outside the wind shifted, carrying a faint hum that wasn't quite mechanical. Clara couldn't tell if it came from the Arcturus or the sky itself. They'll come, Maline said finally, her voice almost lost to the air. Whoever built this, they never stopped listening, and now that you've flown it, they know we're still here. They'll come, and when they do, you'll need more than courage. Clara felt the truth of it down to her bones. The idea of something reaching back didn't terrify her. It completed something inside her she hadn't known was missing. She turned to the older woman, her voice soft but steady. Then, I'll bring faith. Maline studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, as if she'd expected that answer all along. When she left, the desert felt strangely quiet, like the pause between one breath and the next. Clara walked back to the Arcturus and rested her hand on the cool metal, her reflection trembling in its dark surface. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured. Or maybe it wasn't thunder at all, just the faint echo of the universe answering back. The years softened the edges of the desert, though the wind never stopped whispering through the bones of Prescott Airfield. The rust was gone now, the cracks filled, the ghosts of silence replaced by something alive. Hangar 7 stood reborn, its steel polished and glass panes restored, but the air inside still carried that strange hum, low, steady, and patient, like memory itself refusing to fade. Clara Jensen had gray in her hair now, streaks of silver that caught the light like threads of lightning. She moved slower, but her hands were still sure, her eyes still steady. The world had changed since that night, though it didn't realize by how much. News outlets had written their stories. The woman who rebuilt the forgotten sky. Mystery of the Prescott phenomenon. But none of them ever got it right. They called the restoration a project, a preservation of aviation history. Only Clara and her children knew the truth. It wasn't preservation. It was protection. Max had grown tall, quiet, with his mother's resolve and his father's patience. He managed the tours now, a few university researchers here, a handful of historians there, all of them curious, none of them ready. Lily had become an engineer, the youngest on her team at the Aerospace Institute she helped build with her mother's guidance. But she still returned every summer, her hands resting on the same old railings, her gaze lifted to the stars with that familiar wonder. And at the center of it all stood the Arcturus, restored but untouchable. Its black surface gleamed beneath soft museum lighting, roped off from the curious yet watched over with reverence. The placard beside it read simply, Project Arcturus, 1982. Prototype atmospheric vehicle, purpose unknown. People came from all over to stand before it. Some whispered theories, alien technology, Cold War experiment, divine miracle. But the truth was quieter, too quiet for most to hear. The hum beneath the hangar floor still resonated, faint but steady, as though the earth itself remembered what it had seen. Beneath the reinforced foundation, sealed beneath layers of steel and stone, the black box still pulsed, the data core glowing faintly, its rhythm unchanged. No one had ever opened it again, not even Clara. She had buried it there herself, knowing it was never meant to belong to the world as it was. Sometimes, late at night, she'd walk to the exact spot, press her palm to the cold concrete, and feel the faint vibration beneath her skin, a heartbeat older than time still keeping count. Every year on the same night in June, when the air grew heavy and the horizon burned with twilight, the lights along the runway flickered on by themselves. The pattern was always the same, 11 lights, one by one, in perfect sequence, a pulse stretching out into the dark like Morse code across the years. The engineers who maintained the airfield called it a glitch, a quirk in the power grid. Others said it was atmospheric interference. Clara said nothing. She simply watched, the glow reflected in her eyes, and smiled faintly. Lily once asked her what it meant, the lights, the hum, the strange pull that never left the air. Clara had looked at her for a long time before answering. "It means the story isn't finished," she said. "It's just waiting for the next listener." Sometimes, when the wind was low and the hangar quiet, Clara swore she could still hear Samuel's voice, soft, rasping, somewhere just behind her shoulder. It listens to who deserves it, and every so often she'd think of her grandmother, the way her voice had echoed through that impossible flight. Humanity wasn't meant to be small. The world went on, busier, louder, full of noise and progress, but on the edge of the Arizona desert, one place still remembered how to listen. On the anniversary of the first flight, Clara stood alone beneath the starlit sky, the hum beneath her feet a familiar comfort. She looked up, her hair moving gently in the wind, and whispered to the darkness, "We kept it safe." Above her, the stars flickered, once, twice, in a rhythm that felt deliberate, as if answering back. And though the rest of the world dismissed it as coincidence, Clara knew better. Some stories don't end in the sky, they begin there. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you look at the sky a little differently, take a moment to share where in the world you're reading from. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story will remind you just how much wonder still hides in the quiet corners of our world. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and keep listening.